Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I'm speaking with Scott Harrigan, president of Harkin Aerial. Scott, thanks for joining with me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm great to be here, Jose.
So, drones are no longer a novelty. They're essential, I think, to projects. Walk me through some of the most common misconceptions. You're on the front lines of this. What do people not know yet, even though they're becoming core to projects?
Sure, yeah. I think the biggest misconception we run into is that the drone kind of stands on its own, that a drone team is its own thing. I think that comes because that's kind of how it used to be with aerial mapping back in the day. An engineer, an architect would never see the airplane that acquired aerial imagery. But it's very different now. I think the biggest thing we're running into is that the drone work, while becoming more and more essential, is not work that happens in a bubble. It's work that happens very, very closely with another professional. That professional might be an architect if we're doing a facade inspection. It might be a surveyor if we're doing topography, which is a lot of what we do, or it might be a civil engineer if we're doing something based on structures. There's always something to tie into. And so that drone, while it is very cool and a novelty and its own unique type of data capture, is always in the service of something else.
I mean, demystify that for me.
Yeah.
So, when folks hears drones, depending on what side of the table and within real estate they sit, or even just further back, they could have like a scary connotation.
hmm
Just surveillance. Others might think of photos or videos. Like demystify the cameras themselves. I mean, what
Yeah.
what should we know about the spectrum of drones? What exists? Perhaps what's true today that maybe wasn't true before.
Yeah, definitely. So, to start with, when someone is asking for a drone survey or a drone inspection, for the most part, they are thinking about cameras. And so the uh, biggest change of recently is that these cameras have gotten way, way better, way more accurate. It wasn't, you know, less than 10 years ago, you were strapping something equivalent to a GoPro on a drone and hoping it would take good pictures and hoping those pictures would be in focus. But now we have cameras that can zoom, we have cameras that take incredible high resolution imagery. And with that has come the rise of what's called photogrammetry, which is where you can do 3D modeling from those images. And that's most of the projects we're working on is something like that, where we're not just delivering photos, we're actually creating a point cloud or 3D model, very similar to scan to BIM. Um, and that's where we started with this. But now I would say just about it's not quite 50-50 yet, but it's approaching 50-50, is that we have the ability to fly LiDAR on drones. And that's quite a big deal because as anyone who's hired a ground laser scanning crew or something like that has known, that allows us to do a lot that we couldn't do before. Now we can image through trees, capture terrain under vegetation for a topographic survey, or we can get into the nooks and crannies to capture a whole building. So that's grown quite a bit. And the other side of this thing is that the drones have gotten smaller. They used to be, when I started my company, they were big, right? These things were like the size of maybe like a shopping cart to fly. And now most of our drones that we're using, especially on buildings, almost fit in the palm of your hand. And
Wow.
that's, yeah, which has been great. And when we talk about demystifying or making this not scary, right? That's actually the huge advent that's happened here, especially in New York City where we operate, especially in urban areas. You can't be flying a drone that's like the size of a shopping cart around from a safety perspective. That's usually a no-go. So the size and how small these things are and how much safer they become because they're lightweight, that's really, I think, what's pushed this from a novelty or a tough thing to deploy to something we can almost bring on every site now.
Right. You mentioned this being for a variety of different folks, either from architects, surveyors. Um, Double click into that for a moment. When do folks typically require imaging, of their either their site, their property?
Yeah. So I'm sure you've heard this before with robotics, but we always say like when you bring in a robot, whether it's a ground robot or a drone, which we count as one, it's when it's dull, dirty, or dangerous. Right? That's usually the criteria. For the most part, it's dull for us. We're happy to say when it comes to outside, it's really that the drone can cover so much better of an acreage than a ground survey. Let's say I'm a surveyor, I'm doing topography. I have to walk around the entire site to capture data with GPS. It takes a long time. As a surveyor, I've got better things to do. I really don't want to be sending my field crews out to just sit there with GPS on a pole, press a button 100 times over. Uh, I have more pressing matters. And if I can send a drone out, especially when we're talking about large acreage projects, 10 acres a drone makes sense, but we do plenty of developments that can be 100, 200 acres, up to 1,000 acres even with a single drone. And now it makes a ton of sense because that drone is capturing data in a day that would take multiple days, if not weeks, for a field crew to go out and capture. And we reached a point where the accuracy is very, very comparable, the same, if not better, than what you can get from a traditional GPS survey. And so that's on the surveying side. And then on the architecture side, it's all about the roof, right? It's all about the areas that you just can't access easily. You think about tall buildings in New York City, when we do facade inspections, there's just no way. When we've done facade inspections for Cruz before and we ask them, how do you do it? Well, they've either got a rope access team, which is great, but that costs a lot of money. That's a significant investment. You have to have people, right? They're literally scaling the building. Or most of them come to us and say, well, we do binoculars, we do high powered cameras on the ground, and we just try to get what we can. And that always, when I hear that, I say, okay, you should look at a drone because it revolutionizes the way we're inspecting things at height and inspecting things just in a inaccessible area, an area where you'd have to get a cherry picker or some kind of, really expensive equipment to go and take a look at.
I mean, how can I even think about the power of these of these cameras? Like you mentioned being able to capture, acres at a time. What is a rule of thumb? How can I think about both, the space that you can cover in one amount of time? How
Yep.
do I work through that?
Yeah, that's a great question there. So usually we say you can bang out 50 to 100 acres in an hour of flight time with a drone, which is super super impressive. That's for an average survey we're doing for a
You
surveyor.
you said acres
Yep, acres.
in an
Yeah,
hour?
acres. Yep,
Oh my
yep.
goodness. Okay.
Absolutely. That's a drone. You'll see like basically it's like flying a lawnmower in the sky. And this thing does a zigzag pattern across that, and we can clock 15, 20 miles an hour with these drones. Nowadays, again, the cameras are so good. These things map so fast. So the capture is incredible. I would say our average project we're on site for maybe approximately 4 hours, whether it's a large scale topographic area that we have to do or a building inspection. Same thing with the building inspection. You can get to the top of a 400-foot roof in minutes with a drone. In terms of inspecting buildings, it's more about the square footage, the facade, but the same thing applies. It takes a little more time to do facades than say a topographic survey, but it's the same thing. We'll inspect a high-rise building in well under an 8-hour day.
Wow. I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. And what so being able to capture that amount of space. So one thing is images. I'm obviously biased because we're creating a lot of like 3D models that
Sure.
are really dependent on accuracy. I mean, what level of accuracy are you talking about when you're covering that amount of space? I appreciate, every project has different requirements and whatnot, but what are some rules of thumb there for accuracy?
Yeah. So, great question, and I could talk. I could talk all day about accuracy. Gonna need three podcast episodes to fill every nook and cranny. But to give you the simple answer, in general, we usually say drones are a good to the nearest inch kind of project. That is more than enough for surveyors. That's more than enough for general overviews, overlays. And can we get better than that? Absolutely. But that's dependent on how much we can zero in. We've absolutely done inspections of like specific small assets that we can get well into the sub-centimeter inspection range. And the beauty of drones, and where I say I'm a little my heart is in both LiDAR and photogrammetry, but what I love about photogrammetry especially is you can get better just by being closer to something. So we have done things like cell tower inspections, inspected specific assets where we have no problem getting the drone 10 feet away from something. So you can imagine you have a super high resolution camera, an easy small drone, and now you can get 10 feet away from something safely. we can capture things now well under a centimeter. You can start to get into measuring a quarter of an inch of an asset. Now, again, you're going to
Wow.
zero in on that asset, right? There's always, as always, there's a time and money and scale balance. We can't do that for every single piece of a building. But I'll add too, one thing that the drone world I think runs into more than perhaps laser scanning, traditional laser scanning, is GPS. We're very dependent on GPS. That means a lot to surveyors. Tying into surveys that are done with GPS is like probably my what I spend the most time on working through challenges through the day. But it does go back to who are we collaborating with, right? Can we get control? Can we get another way to verify the accuracy there? We can always inspect a building, but often people say, well, what should I compare your inspection to? And therein lies the rub because we
Right.
usually want to collaborate with another professional, usually a surveyor, to really make sure we dial in that accuracy. We can prove that accuracy.
And to make sure that I'm fully appreciating that, when you say a surveyor, you're referring to perhaps the traditional practice of kind of setting controls using, total stations, kind of uh,
Exactly. Yep.
work on. Got it.
Exactly. While not required on every project, I think most of what I pull my hair out over the day is control, and that's coordinating with the survey and getting that control set in and making sure we match that control. That is where the drone stuff really starts to matter. And again, it depends. Facade inspections, we're rarely setting control because the architect just wants to know the existing conditions. They want to take a measurement locally, maybe measure the width of a crack, measure the distance of a crack to a feature like a door or window. But when we get into building layouts and things like, work for construction and foundations and things like that, where it needs to line up month after month after month with another survey, well, we have to tie that data into something, and that's where control becomes essential. So I kind of say I'm a surveyor's best salesman. We often bring in a surveyor on a lot of projects when we're like, well, the drone can do it, but we can't prove it without a control setup already put on site.
You've had an opportunity to capture a variety of different kinds of projects, from buildings. You've mentioned facades to extremely large, like just land areas. Um, in your view, what is the absolute no-brainer when it comes to return on investment, like ROI for perhaps a owner or operator, or perhaps the architect trying to think about the ROI? Where is an absolutely no-brainer where, like, if you're not using this workflow, you're missing out?
Yeah,
Does anything stand out to you?
yeah. Two things. I will give always a plug for facade inspections. If you are looking to inspect a facade, and you're even thinking about putting scaffolding up on a building, putting the drone in first makes every single bit of that process easier. Here in New York, you're required to do hands-on facade inspections, so the drone can't do the entire inspection. And still, we have tons of architects coming to us all the time because the people who have to put up scaffolding or do hands-on inspections love having a lay of the land ahead of time and seeing a 3D model of their entire building so that they can plan their inspection, they can plan those scaffold drops. So that one's a no-brainer. It's like peanut butter and jelly. It's like facades and drones go together so well because the time savings is just so big. The other two, I'll say real quick, is topographic, anything involving cut and fill, terrain, earthworks, that kind of thing. For the same exact reason. Now we have drones that can get LiDAR, right? We can look at vegetation, the terrain underneath vegetation, which is incredible, and it's become very cost effective. And if you're on a site that's bare earth, so not too much trees or vegetation, or an urban area, you're able to get an entire model of the ground, the facade, the roof of the building all in one. So pretty much if you're doing anything outdoors with the and thinking of doing laser scanning, the drone makes a ton of sense. On top of that, you get a map, you get an aerial view, and so many architects and engineers need to draw site plans, and so the drone basically produces half the site plan for you because you get a nice high resolution top down view of your site.
Yeah. Walk me through those. So like I know that, photogrammetry, LiDAR, these are all pieces of equipment that are different pieces of technology, but also have different outputs.
Yep.
How can I think about the outputs? You talked about images. Are we quite literally talking about, combination of JPEGs and other file types? So if I'm an architect, how do I think through which to pick to make sure that it
Yeah.
lines up with the tools that I use?
Yeah, great question. So we always say to people, start with cameras. If you don't know, start with cameras because exactly everyone can look at a JPEG, everyone can look at an image. And what's so cool about photogrammetry and why I'm kind of I would say I'm a little partial to it in my work, at least on for architecture and on buildings, is because you get photos. Everyone can look at a photo. Now, what we do from that is we produce a 3D model, and that can be a mesh or a point cloud, which would be the exact same as laser scanning. And so those both can go into CAD and go through your standard, call it your standard scan to BIM workflow. But the images are great, and these images are geolocated, right? So every single image, I have a latitude, a longitude, and the height, which is really, really nice because if I'm working outdoors and I need to know, okay, I have an asset I need to inspect and I want to know where it is, or I'm looking at a facade and there's a crack and I need to know where it is, that's automatically there. It's automatically recorded with GPS. And that is a huge, huge benefit to doing anything on an exterior. You already know where it is. So the deliverables are JPEGs, but they're geolocated JPEGs, and the deliverable would usually be a point cloud. But again, it's a georeferenced point cloud. So
Right. Right. I say I have a project coming up. I'm a project manager. I know instinctively that this makes sense to me. How do I think about budgeting? Is this
yeah,
typically a service that folks will price on a, per square foot basis, on just a time basis? Like how do I even begin to think about that?
yeah, that's a great point, and it does differ based on the industry that we serve. This took us a long time to get right, so to speak, because drones were such a different type of workflow, right? They don't really behave based on interior square footage, for example. That's not necessarily it. So, um, we'll do it based on an acreage. If we're doing a topographic survey, those ones are easy. Those are very straightforward. And with buildings, we'll usually do based on the square footage of the exterior. We'll do based on the square footage of the exterior because that really is our best way to figure out both how long it's going to take to capture and how much time it'll take to process this data. Uh, we like to keep it simple. I'm sure you talked to, 5 different drone pilots to get 5 different answers, but we like to keep it simple. And personally, we just turn it into a day rate because it's like whatever we're doing, the drone's out there and capturing. So basically, how many days it takes, we figure out whether it's the acreage or the square footage, and then that gets broken out into a day rate. We find that's the simplest way to do it. We also try to uh, keep things where we're not splitting hairs over square footage. It's very different than interiors because square footage drives everything, drives costs of construction, of all estimates are based off square footage. But when you get to the exterior of a building, that square footage on a drone kind of doesn't matter anymore, which is usually a good thing because the drone's going to be able to capture the exterior of a building so much faster than, say, you would have to scan every single floor of a high rise, right? Just based off logistics, you can fly a drone around the outside of a building a lot faster than you can go through doors and upstairs and up elevators. So what we find is the exterior cost savings are really, really big because it's basically how much can we capture in a day. And again, that's, your classic high-rise building, maybe 10, 15, 20 stories, that can be captured in a day. That can absolutely be captured in a day.
Wow. Wow.
Yep.
And so what so again, perhaps I have a project ahead of me. I'm trying to gather budget and time. So we're talking about in terms of speed, we're talking about being out on the site potentially for a single day, being able to capture 10 acres or so, probably more, as you mentioned. Um, and from the time I go from zero to seeing all of this high resolution images, we're talking about
Yep.
a day or two.
Yeah, easily for our basic models and meshes, we can usually do this stuff in like 48 hours.
Wow.
That's very possible in a lot of projects. Again, it's driven by what we have to coordinate with. Sometimes large topographic surveys, we got to work with a surveyor. That's going to be more on the order of weeks, but still, when it's incredible that I originally thought we would be like I was concerned we'd be competing with surveyors. So I was originally worried that like surveyors would have concerns about working with us because they were thinking that we were going out and doing that against them, which is absolutely not the case because surveyors, there's a lot of reasons you have to run a survey. You have to be licensed. That's like a legally binding thing. But what we found is so many surveyors are hiring us because their lead times right now There are very few surveyors entering the profession compared to who's leaving the profession, unfortunately. And we have many, many survey firms, great professionals who do good work that are just absolutely just backlogged with work, right? They can't find enough people to help them. They need all the help they can get. And the drone is removing such a huge pressure off of their lives because of capturing that acreage, able to capture that stuff. So surveys that used to take a month, I hear client after client saying, I called up a survey, I need a survey done. They quoted me a month and a half, even 2 months. Not out of the question for how overbooked some survey firms can be. And with the drone, right, we can now get that down into weeks, if not under a week for like large scale surveys,
Wow.
which is awesome. And then building inspections, that's a more of a simpler process. That's a matter of days.
Wow. Wow. Um, before the recording, you had mentioned that you're doing some great work for some, I guess government agencies. I mean, I'm curious. You're on the front lines of this. Um, how is maybe the public sector using drone capture as a way to kind of understand either planning or existing conditions?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, a lot of it that we're seeing and we're happy to see is that government agencies are really, really leaning into digital as builts now. We have worked with several New York City agencies where the deliverable was actually a point cloud, which blows my mind. A couple years ago, I think that would have been when crazy talk, frankly. And now we have firms, agencies, they're using a software like ArcGIS. They're using like these GIS platforms, many of them cloud based, that can now just ingest all of these deliverables no problem. And so we're seeing a lot of it is asset based. Like an agency just wants, they have 12 properties or they have, 5 miles of shoreline and they want to get everything figured out on there. They want to know where docks are. They want to know the topography of, say, like a beach, for erosion studies. They basically want every asset along a large area or a long linear run. And we're able to deliver all of that with the drone. Again, maybe that's a 2D thing with ortho imagery. Maybe it's a 3D deliverable with the point cloud. But I think that's the biggest thing we're seeing, basically just asset documentation and identification. But again, we're seeing it more and more as well of being accepted as uh, and in conjunction with a survey, being able to be used as the basis for design on a lot of construction projects.
Yeah. One of the things that stands out to me is, Scott, I mean, I met you in New York City,
Mhm.
perhaps one of the most dense places in the country. I recognize that it's probably more of an exception than it is a rule, but historically, drones have been really difficult to fly
Yeah.
in places like New York City. You also mentioned governments. I mean, where are we currently today when it comes to permissions to fly drones? I'm saying this also acknowledging that just a few weeks ago there was in the news I don't know, tons of unidentified objects over like the Hudson in New Jersey and whatnot, and there's all this kind of just news and concern around drones, and I think proper protocols need to be in place. On the one hand, there's clear benefits. There's certainly concern, um, but what should we know in terms of what has advanced in terms of the permitting and permissions of drones and who should be flying them?
Yeah, a great question. And I think one I always run into, because compared to compared to any other part of a construction project, an architecture project, right, a ground survey, laser scan, on the drone side, we are the most regulated portion of a data capture ever. I don't know of any other type of data capture where to even use the equipment, you need a license. Um, and this has been an interesting thing here because it's more. I'll start by the basics. First off, all drone flight, anything that's not recreational, so anything where there's an exchange of money, is regulated by the FAA. And you need an FAA, what's called a Part 107 certificate, which is a license to operate a drone. It's basically like doing private pilot ground school. It does take some time to learn and study and take it, so it's definitely not a anybody can pick up a drone and fly it on a project. You need to be licensed. On top of that, you then need to get permission to operate in certain types of airspace. So if you're operating near an airport, if you're operating pretty much anywhere in the vicinity of where there's an active runway, the sky is broken up into basically imaginary parcels of which you get varying permission for. New York City is quite a challenging one because we have Newark, we have JFK, and we have LaGuardia, not to mention Westchester, Long Island, and all of the airports that then scatter that area. So most of the time or I'd say, yeah, the majority of the time, we are looking at a requiring both. We have to have an FAA licensed operator to run the drone. We have to have a authorization from the FAA to operate near an airport. That part has gotten way, way easier. That used to take months to approve. Now it's often instant. There is a system called a Lance, like LAANC, and that is this basically I have an app. I open up the app and I say where I want to fly, and I either get a yes immediately, I get a no, hang on, let us approve this, or I get a no, hang on, you need to contact us, which is great. It has really, really made things so much easier. The last,
That's a big deal.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a big deal.
now, there's one more hurdle, and that is with the city. Most cities, major cities these days, have permits on requiring you to take off or land uh, on city property. New York City is even more, I'd say, more stricter than most in that they require a permit whether you're operating anywhere in the five boroughs. On private property or off, they currently the way the law stands is they don't care. They say you need to get this permit. Now, that also used to be a very, very difficult process. And thankfully, thanks to really a lot of drone pilots who got together in New York City and banded together and really, you know, took took the city. Frankly, they actually took the city to court over it. That has changed considerably, and now through the NYPD, we file a permit, and that can take 30 days. That is the longest pole in the tent on a lot of projects. But the beauty of that is, if you're on a site and you're flying repeatedly, you can get fast tracked. You can get fast tracked to 14 days or less. And so, we're happy to see that was really the last hurdle, and that one only in the last couple of years has been cleared. But we finally kind of cleared that last hurdle. So there are hoops. I tell clients first thing we ask when we're doing a drone project is what is the project site, because the earlier we can get a head start on that process, the better. But
Right.
compared to getting a ground laser scan or any other kind of scanning gear, it is a little bit more of a regulatory hurdle. But again, we're all for it in a way because, like you said, the New Jersey drone spottings and all that buzz. We got a lot of calls being like, "How does this work? Is that you guys?" A lot there, and kind of the beauty of that is that there is a system where drones are identified. We actually have to fly with something called remote ID. Our drone actually has a transponder that is always saying where it is, who's operating it, and even if you don't have one attached, the NYPD has equipment where they can find where the drone is. So
Mm,
there are a
mm.
lot of protection systems in place. You'll see this a lot in stadiums. Some guy wants to catch catch the Jets game and thinks that he can film it on his drone, and he flies in there. And there's equipment at the stadium that automatically detects where the drone is, detects where the operator is, and then they send people to come and talk to that guy. So we take safety and the regulations here super seriously because we can't afford not to. And I think I like to tell people, yeah, there are some regulatory hoops we need to jump through to get a drone on a site, but it's all very straightforward if you're working with a operator that has a good record and has been doing this for a while. And on top of it, it's all there to protect people. It's all there to make sure that, yeah, when we have New Jersey drone sightings, that kind of thing, there is a method in which they can identify drones. And that's actually what they did for the New Jersey drone stuff. They went through a bunch of the logs. I'll be honest, I mean, you didn't ask for my hot take on that, but I'll give it to you.
Tell me, tell me.
90% of those spottings were manned aircraft. I mean, 90% were helicopters, which just goes to show how hard it is to ID a drone or an aircraft when it's at height. But the interesting thing is, yeah, the FAA has logs of this stuff. There are all these sites where they're tracking drones, and they're able to go through that and say, well, did we see an aircraft or did we see a drone? Because they do broadcast differently, of course, and so most
Mm.
airports have equipment to tell the difference between a drone or an aircraft, or a drone that's supposed to be there and a drone that is either flying recklessly or maliciously.
To stay in and around the Hudson, New York, I remember hearing a stat, the exact numbers I don't remember, but something to the tune of several thousand miles of scaffolding is up
Yep.
in New York City at any given time. I have to imagine, and again, I don't know the numbers, but much of that is probably attributed to just the recurring inspections of buildings. I have, tell me why I'm wrong, but building owners must love you, and the scaffolding industry must not
Yep.
like you that much.
Exactly.
Um, I mean, I think we could all agree that things like scaffolding is a bit of an eyesore, right, to the city. Um, will drones address this?
I think they will. There's a lot of movement going on right now. The DOB is currently doing a variety of ongoing studies to determine to what extent drones can replace scaffolding in a way that maintains safety. Um, I also think if you're a scaffolding company, you don't have to fret too much. They'll always be there, right? We're never going to eliminate hands-on inspections, nor should we. I mean, I'm not a facade envelope engineer, but my conversations with them, I can totally understand when you need to drill into, have your hands on. There's just certain things that I don't think drones are ever going to do, or not do as cost effectively that somebody in person at height can do faster. But visual inspections is not one of those. And so much of what we're looking to do is to have the drone be able to replace a visual inspection for a scaffold, and then only require the scaffold when you need to do a hands-on. I think that's win-win for everybody. The scaffolding companies are still gonna, they'll still be around. They still absolutely have a purpose. But yeah, between the eyesore and also just the nature of uh oh, just the nature of having this stuff up there at height. Also, the other thing is, and not to knock scaffolds, but they're temporary structures, right? You have a lot of scaffold nets set up, and I'm not saying in an unsafe manner, but they're not designed to be up for a decade. That's not the intended purpose of this stuff. And we've seen reports. It's crazy, but I remember hearing one of like, a kid was born in New York City apartment complex, goes to college. The scaffold's been up through his entire life outside this building. And that's the stuff that we're trying to eliminate there. That's a process where, yeah, it served its intended purpose. And also, you think of these structures, they serve a purpose, but they remain unutilized 90% of the time, right? They're there for these one-time events or just a couple of events a year, but they're up there the entire time. So exactly, we're really trying to move to a much more like on-demand inspection model. And we also believe is that it should be the architect or the facade inspector's choice. They determine how many drops there are. Right now, the way the law is that every 60 feet of a building you need a drop. And that's a fairly arbitrary number. That was a number that was come up with decades ago, but doesn't really address the uniqueness of a building. Sometimes we might need more drops than 60 feet. Sometimes we might need less. So understanding that and letting the drone address it and be part of the planning process, I think will make everyone's lives easier, including the scaffolding companies, because they're going to be able to, they can plan their drops ahead of time because they have all this great drone data in this 3D model they can plan around, rather than just show up to a site and say, how are we going to scaffold this building?
Drones have also been talked about in the context of delivery.
Yeah.
Uh, what's your take there?
Yeah.
I have to imagine folks are going to be wary. And again, I use New York City. I appreciate that most of the country is not as dense as New York. But are we going to be seeing the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world deploy drones
Yeah.
for delivery? And are we going to see? Can we imagine a sky kind of full of different drone, showing up on our doorstep?
This is a good one, and man, this might be my hottest take yet. So I'm
Oh my God.
throwing fair warning out there. I personally, and I'm probably gonna have some friends in drone delivery that are gonna call me up, but uh, I, uh, I we are a very tech agnostic company. Even though I bill us as a drone company, like Harkin, we are the first ones to say if a drone doesn't make sense or there's another alternate method, we're gonna go for that. We say no to drones on projects where like, hey, a surveyor on the ground can do it. They're the ones, they'll do it better and faster. And drone delivery is a very interesting thing. My personal take is we will see this in niche areas, but I personally do not believe in the concept of like Uber drones flying all around New York City delivering pizzas to people, like some might claim. Uh, Number one is that electric vehicles are awesome. You can stuff so many pizzas in a truck, and if we get to self-driving, and if we get to especially electric zero-emission vehicles everywhere, um, to me that problem has been solved, and that problem has been solved actually with a superior technological solution. Having said that, I have seen deliveries of blood and vital organs between one building on a college or on a hospital campus to another. Absolutely. Deliveries between multiple hospital campuses in like an error-based network to deliver vital stuff. I basically say if the package is light, it's expensive, and it's time sensitive, yeah, now drones are starting to make a lot of sense. Um, but for, let's say I want to, get some tissue paper from my local Walmart, I do think ground-based robotics are going to actually win that fight out in metropolitan areas if we go that route. I think, and again, I might have drone people are gonna rag on me for this, but I think everyone kind of wants to keep the skies as least crowded as possible. I think there's something to be said. I'm a huge environmental person as well, and actually we take prolonged flights over sensitive areas like environmental areas, wetlands, which there's much in New York, very, very seriously. And so I do think there's actually some environmental aspects between noise and just increased air traffic that does pose a concern that ground-based trucks, whether they're self-driving or just simply electric vehicles with no emission, that solve that better. So my long story short is I don't think in urban areas we're going to see the explosion of drone delivery. I could be wrong, but part of that is I think they're better suited for other areas. Another one we see is like last mile delivery, where someone lives in a very, very remote area. They're up in the mountains in the Catskills, for example, and that UPS truck has to drive, a quarter of a mile up this crazy sloped area. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to schedule that person for drone delivery. That's going to make that a more cost effective, faster,
Right.
better service. But when I think about the end goal, and maybe that's my theme here of drones serve an end goal, but they're great when used in conjunction with something. When I think about the end goal of drone delivery, I don't think a drone flying from New Jersey to Long Island City does make sense versus getting it, warehoused in somewhere in New Jersey and then driving it via a truck, or even, we're also seeing another thing I will kind of joke about is I think we're going to see the rise of automated marine vessels much, much quicker than drones. I foresee ships crossing the Long Island Sound completely automated more than I see drones, just in the sense of they're more logistically schedulable or doable, basically. I'll add one more thing too: weather, man. Weather, weather is the great delayer of drone projects, and so that is an interesting part of drone delivery that I think people don't always think about either. It's not always a sunny day here in New York, so yeah.
How sensitive is it? I mean, what would be kind of a hindrance to
Yeah.
for a flight?
Uh, I I won't speak as a drone delivery expert. I can say when we work with our stuff, and granted, we are flying more sensitive scanners for sure when we're doing LiDAR and photogrammetry, but anything over light rain is usually going to be a no-go for a drone that day. Yeah, I think the delivery drones will be able to handle better than that, but uh, there's something called IFR conditions, instrument flight rules. It's what that stands for, and that's basically if it's too cloudy, the clouds are too low, or it's raining too much, aviation switches entirely over from a visual based system to a computerized instrument based system. That's how a pilot can land at LaGuardia right on the numbers, no problem, even when it's fog out.
Hmm.
There are going to be very, very strict rules about drones with that. We're seeing it. It's actually called BVLOS, a lot of acronyms I know, but beyond visual line of sight. And
Hmm.
that is growing. That is the ability for us to operate drones while we don't have to be standing there with our eyes on the drone. That's going to revolutionize everything. And drone delivery is dependent on that. So you will see drone delivery really blow up once that final rule is passed by the FAA. They've been working on it. They're basically trialing it in limited scenarios. But that's going to be a weather dependent thing, right? That's going to still say we're going to trial it with you're only going to be able to operate in good weather remotely, and then eventually years later, if the FAA finds that they can manage equivalent safety, then they would allow drones to fly in inclement weather. But Yeah.
What experiences led you to doing where you are today? I mean, growing up, perhaps I don't know if drone operator was perhaps even a common option. I mean, what led you to doing what you're doing?
Yeah, it was not. I definitely didn't go into school and say I want to be a drone pilot one day. But it is funny because I think it is the marriage of two themes in my life. I've been shaped by both a love of architecture, 3D modeling, that data capture. I at one point I considered being like a 3D design artist for a living, and aviation has always been also just a passion of mine. Actually was lucky enough to get my private pilot license while I was in college, and that really cemented my love of aviation. But I was had found myself just I picked mechanical engineering. I thought that was a great blend of the more creative 3D modeling side of things that I enjoyed, but also hopefully a stable career. And I enjoy having goals and objectives and projects that are a little like clearly defined. So I I gravitated towards mechanical engineering, but aviation was there as well. And I my first job out of college was as an MEP engineer. I was working on HVAC, I was working on buildings, but I worked with a larger firm on Long Island, and so I got exposed to surveying and the civil side of things quite a bit. And at the same time, I was just flying recreationally, like aircraft for fun. I was enjoying my private pilot license, and I happened to get hooked up with a company in Brooklyn that needed a engineer on nights and weekends to help design a drone. And they were actually doing filming for, for movies, for commercials. They were totally on the creative side of it. And when I first saw a drone, fly over a rooftop in their test flights in Brooklyn, I mean, that like kind of you have these threads to your life that you're like, okay, I love this, but I also love that. And they're never going to cross. Like, one's going to be a hobby, one's going to stay work. I got to pick. I think we're often driven to do like these binary, I got to be this or I got to be that. And, the minute I saw this device that is both operates in the world of aviation, just like all the flying I had done, but is a tool that can capture all the information I needed at my day job, working as an engineer. I mean, it was like 20 light bulbs went off, not even one. I was like, I have to do this. And you didn't ask, but I'll give you the the quick origin story of Harkin. No, the uh, basically I had tried to convince the firm I was working at to use drones and incorporate it there, and they were open to it. But I think progress back then was still slow, and to their credit, the drone technology still had a long way to go. But I was a bit of an impatient person on this technology, and I basically said, "Look, I want to leave and go do this full time," which was to their blessing. But it's funny because I I couldn't have done the drone stuff right out of college because I needed the experience working as an MEP engineer to know even what the heck, what is this in service of? But at the same time, I made the jump to start my own business with this because I just felt this technology is both moving so fast, but also so niche. I'm like, of course, an engineering firm wouldn't want to get into drones right off the bat. There, the liability, the FA. You look at all this stuff. It makes so much more sense to contract this out. There's just it's just its own beast in terms of a type of data capture there. I think we're seeing that change. I think we're seeing lots of firms adopt it in house still, and we do a lot of consulting on that and training as much as we do services. But really, to get back to your answer there, yeah, it was really just a lot of different threads in my life coming together all at once. But it was just aviation, meaning design and CAD and projects that have a real impact on people. I'm so lucky that I'm able to like just scratch three itches all at once there.
For those that also want to pursue the same thing, I mean, what advice would you give them? You mentioned it's not just as simple as going out, buying a piece of equipment. You also talked about the importance of kind of getting prior experience.
Yeah.
Um, what are maybe some of the more practical pieces of advice that I think have benefited you and perhaps kind of following the right steps?
Yeah.
If I'm a young person coming out of college wanting to pursue this, what should I know?
Yeah, definitely. I think going back to the theme that the drone stuff doesn't happen in a bubble, right? It's in service of another profession or a trade, much like, IPX, you usually help out architects or property owners. It's the same thing. I tell people if you want to fly drones to do mapping and surveying and civil engineering, well, you know, there's nothing more dangerous than a civil engineer that knows drones. Like having that foundation of that knowledge, whether that's what you want to do as a profession or you're trying to give a service to people who are in that profession, doing time in that profession, I think was the most important thing to me. I think that foundational time working for an engineering firm was very, very important and shaped so much of both the direction I wanted to go, as well as like gave me a lot of the skills I'm using. Because the drone stuff, yeah, it takes time to learn to fly a drone, but it's not rocket science. It can be absolutely learned as like an add-on skill there. It is all of the stuff behind it. It's the I've taken pictures and I've scanned it. Now what? That's the stuff where I think new newcomers come to this industry can really help us out and fill those gaps there. It's in processing the data, or it's in actually talking to an engineer or an architect and conveying how this technology really does work in their day to day, how these deliverables actually match up to their software. So it's tough to talk to an engineer or an architect, and I'm sure you've gone through this. It's tough to talk with a design professional without being in their shoes and knowing intimately what they're talking about when they say what they want. So having that experience there, I think, is really, really helpful. I think we've been successful because I've been in the shoes of my customer before, and I do always encourage people coming into the industry, if you want to do drone delivery, well, then working at a delivery company first makes a ton of sense to understand that industry. Likewise, drones for like power line inspection, the people I know who know that the best, well, they worked in that industry for a bit, or they, got a mentor in that industry to help them fill that industry specific knowledge.
Right. On your day to day, you're straddling between hardware and software. What might be the impact of AI if you haven't already
Mhm.
seen it in your space? Is it a lagging thing? Is it already kind of disrupting how you approach capture through drones?
That's a really interesting question there, because I think it is coming in like spurts, sort of. Definitely to start with the software side. Processing the data, analyzing the data. A perfect example is I'm talking with sod inspections a lot. There's a lot of progress being made in like automatically detecting cracks from imagery using AI. That's the one where I think we're getting the absolute most value out of, like today, right away. I think it will continue to creep in on the software processing side more and more. I think that will be I think it'll all be in identifying assets, identifying things, picking things out of photos or point clouds. But where I think it will eventually go over to is the actual drone operation stage. We're starting to see little bits of it in automated capture in buildings. It's not quite there yet. I think the impacts are much higher on the software processing side, just removing that tedious human labor aspect of it, going through a ton of photos, for example. But eventually, I definitely think we'll migrate to the point where very little input is going to be required to have a flight plan done on a building. I will just show the drone pictures of that building and it will plan out an optimal flight plan. And I think that's great. That's all stuff that is ripe for removing the tedium out of it. Just in the same way that the drone itself removed the tedium out of having to go out and do that topo survey. It's just that natural progression of less time spent on, let's just call it, low value tasks. I think flight planning is definitely one of them. Flight planning is something I would love to never do again and have an AI do it. And I think that can be done eventually.
Scott, this has been really fun. If I weren't geeking out so much, I failed to look at the time, and I'm over here keeping you on a Friday.
No,
But
all good.
for folks that want to reach out to you and learn more, work with you, where should they reach out to you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn if you look up Scott Harrigan. If you look up Scott Harrigan drones, I'm sure that'll even point you there for sure. And you can always reach out to me via email. I'm Scott at harkin.io. That's HARKIN.io.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Jose.